and ask everyone else to put themselves on mute, and we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to our third workshop in this journey, I think we can call it, of learning about watersheds and watershed leadership. Really glad that you can join today. I recognize this is a difficult day for travel. Hopefully many of you are in a place where you can stay. I put a snow scene behind me sort of in honor of what we're celebrating as we look out on a different form of water today. But we're glad that you're here, and we hope that this 3-hour block will be engaging and useful to you as you lead your watershed. Okay, our theme today is understanding your watershed. So 2 weeks ago, we focused on people. So this is now shifting from people to, what's the physical things that are there. And the focus is how you can assess or inventory your watershed through the use of resources that you can access from your home or office, which are mainly the web-based computer tools. I want to put this in context. So in our next session in 2 weeks, we'll talk about getting into the field to understand your watershed. Hopefully the weather will be good then, and you can go out and do an inventory. And many watershed folks particularly like that part. But using computer tools, as we'll talk about today, is another part of what you need to do to really find out about your watershed. It's an important first step. So we've talked about these kind of tools for decades, in fact, but they're getting more and more of them and easier to use. So I think it's particularly relevant, and there's more information than ever that's easy to access. So I'm just going to, before we get started, kind of look over the agenda as it's coming up. First, you notice that I took off the column that clarifying when you need to have your microphone and camera on, but I think you know the system. When you're listening, please be on mute. You can leave your camera on or off, and then when you go into the discussions, please have them on. As we look ahead, in the afternoon, we're going to have the biggest presentation will be by Julie Lair, that all of you know, and she'll talk about both these aspects of characterizing your watershed, and we'll have some discussions along the way. Because of her schedule, we had to put that after the break, and so we're doing things a little different, that we're going to talk about specific tools first. So before that, we're going to introduce a few tools and how they can be useful in watershed management. But what's tricky about this in leading a session for all of you is that we know you're in very different places. We have people who are beginners, and the whole idea of it may be intimidating and scary, and we want to work with you and help you. And there may be other people for whom this is old hat, and so your concern is, will I be bored? I already know how to do these. And so we'll also introduce some new tools. So I really want to emphasize once again that we recognize everybody is in a different place, and we just want you to move forward from where you are. But everybody can use these tools. We'll provide plenty of I don't know, that's not hand-holding exactly, but plenty of instructions so that you can do it. Because of the different places, we're again having two options. So Bob Clark will lead a session that, if you're new to web-based mapping computer tools, we recommend you select this. He'll lead you step by step through the main ones we'll use. Now, it's not the only chance to use to learn. We also have videos that will be in the assignment. Watch this video, and then you can do exactly what's in the video. So really, everybody does succeed with these tools. So Indiana Map and Web Soil Survey are the main ones that we think are such great background. But for people who already know these, or if you don't know them, but you're very comfortable learning on your own, so you don't need somebody to walk through step by step, then I'll have a different option. And what we're going to do is more advanced with some different web tools that you can look into, and then also more about the layers. So we'll split like we did last time. So you don't need to do it now, but by then you'll need to put 1 or 2 by your name. Please do that at some point. So rename, or if you can't rename, then put it in the chat so Sarah knows where to put you. Okay, so did I get this? All right. So now we're going to go to the team discussions, or I'm going to introduce the team discussions. And the purpose here is to sort of look back and reflect on the learning module that you just finished. You all, everybody that I looked at just did a great job. I think they were really interesting. I really enjoyed what you submitted, but you haven't seen each other. So I hope that this helps reflect a little bit more. So first of all, you reflected on the driving forces, and you could talk about this in your discussion. I think they're really interesting, and I hope it was helpful to just think about these. What is also striking is that there, some stakeholder groups, almost everyone has, like the SWCD and farmers, but there are some that are less common. Youth was one I hadn't really seen before. I thought that was interesting. Somebody that took like a local leadership. Here we have Leadership Lafayette, you have different places like that. I thought that was a good one. And then there's the question of the elected officials that we know are so important, but are hard to get. So maybe you had some thoughts about those. So I just thought you're going to go into group discussions in your teams without the team leaders. And we didn't assign any facilitators. So we hope that this will work out well. Many of you are leaders and are probably comfortable leading, but just share the question that we listed is, what did you learn? But I thought I'd put some more discussion ideas if it's helpful to you. You might talk about what new stakeholder groups you identified, and were you able to identify strategies likely to reach them? I think that's a good question. How did you feel about it, right? You're just sharing among you. Did you identify different strategies for getting groups involved rather than keeping them involved, right? That was two different places in the table. So I don't know how many put something really different there. And then another one that occurred to me just this morning, I was writing this, like, did you discuss this with anyone in your watershed? Now you'll be discussing with people in other watersheds, but is that something that they've thought about? So these are just ideas. You can discuss whatever you want for the next 10 minutes. We made Google Slides if that's useful to you. If somebody wants to type in that, you want to remember some good thoughts, that's great. Then they'll be available to other people. But we're not going to come back and do a formal share. What we're going to do, if I haven't talked too long, I knew I would talk a little more than 5 minutes, is anybody who has a good story, a good thought, will just have popcorn sharing. If somebody wants to, they could raise their hand and share, but we'll not go group by group, just so you know where you're getting. The other thing I wanted to mention is that this is the last day that we'll use these specific teams. I'm glad somebody says they're awesome teams, but hopefully by now you've really gotten to know those 5 people. But take advantage as starting next week, we'll mix you up more. So, use this as the whole day you'll be in these groups. But this is the last time with these particular people, until we meet in person at the end of March. So that's something to think about. Okay, that's it. Does anyone have any questions? And otherwise, Sarah will send you to your groups and come back in
10 minutes, Jane.
Can you do it maybe 8 minutes? I talked too long. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Any questions? Or I'm going to go ahead and open these. And then there were 2.
Can you set it? I was thinking you could set it so people don't actually have to click on join, that you just send them automatically. Or am I remembering wrong? I haven't done it for a long time.
I thought I checked that box, but now I can't actually tell you since the things are.
Okay.
I don't have access to that.
Okay. It's a box, like I say. So that makes sense.
Yeah, once you click the button, all your options start hiding on you. So.
Welcome back. I hope those discussions were useful. We're just going to take a couple minutes to share for anybody who would be willing to share their thoughts with the whole group. You can just raise your hand, or as long as there's nobody else talking, just go ahead if anybody has a thought.
Our group talked a lot about trying to contact commissioners and elected officials, and depending on the person and depending on the county, it could be pulling teeth to easy participation.
Yeah, there's no good strategy, but hopefully as we talk together, maybe we'll get more ideas and we'll get inspired to do what's obviously difficult work. So thank you. Any other thoughts to share?
Our group talked. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh,
Our group had a few different things that we talked over, and even a few other questions that we reached out and asked if anybody else had other ideas about how to handle it. Like we have a couple people in Group C that deal a lot with like Amish and stuff, and that group is particularly hard to reach just because of the different beliefs and social things that they have and do. So we try to come up with ideas how to get them involved or keep people involved.
Our group talked a little bit about how, you have to separate sometimes people's personal lives and their business lives. And, even though you might be able to appeal to somebody, personally about how things should be run in a watershed, that might directly conflict with how their business needs to be run or what they need to do business-wise. So even if you can appeal to them personally, that doesn't always work, and you have to appeal to them in a different way too.
Yeah, so many challenges. Thank you. Okay, well, it's 9:20, so we'll move on. Hopefully talking about that again was useful, but we're going to move on to starting as an introduction for the computer tools. So, so this is an introduction. And I don't usually do this, but when I typed I started making this PowerPoint, right? And I typed computer tools and watershed leadership, and PowerPoint helpfully brought up design ideas. Does this happen to all of you? And usually they're weird and you don't accept them, but this is the first one that came up. And I thought, well, it's kind of weird to have a rocket coming out of it, but actually, I thought that it was kind of inspiring because it conveys the idea that these computer tools will lift us up and move us forward. So I don't know what you think about that, but that's how I got this interesting title slide. So as you'll hear today, our theme is characterizing the watershed. And Julie Lair, when she'll talk after the break, she'll talk about the first step, which is the desktop survey, which is what we're focusing on now before the break, and then also monitoring and also doing a windshield survey. But the common theme is that we're trying to understand better what's in the watershed. So we sometimes use this word desktop survey, or we can sometimes use the computers. But the point is that it's information you gather by sitting at your workplace, not something that's complete in itself, but it's a really good start. So we have a handout that lists the tools, and you'll also see that in module R3, which I'll talk about at the end, we're going to ask you to use these. So there's two tools that I think are so useful that if you haven't used them, do use them, then that's the assignment. So one is called Indiana Map and one is called Web Soil Survey. And I'll talk about these in a minute. Now, for those of you who have already used one or the other or both of them, we want this exercise to be useful to you, of course. So then we want you to go ahead and use something else. So we've made a long list of other things that are useful, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in my session, sort of option 2, but they're also listed on this handout. So I wanted to point that out. But I did want to say to everybody that Indiana Map is just a really nice resource. And I was reading again what people turned in last year and how many people say, wow, I had no idea all this was available. It's a tool that's developed and kept up through the Indiana Geological and Water Survey, which is in Bloomington, but it's not their data. They just put it together in a nice, easy to use format. They collect most of the data from the state agencies. So it's really better than anything that's put out by the agencies themselves as a way to get at it and put it all together. So what I wanted to say is whether or not you've used it before, Indiana Map is useful. So on the left, if you've never used it or similar tools, you will be surprised that you can derive meaningful information for your own watershed. You can do this. That's what I want to emphasize. But if you're, especially if you haven't done it before, we encourage you to attend Bob Clark's introductory session. And then, as I say, you'll also have videos to watch, and it gives you through some specific exercises that just give you a touch of the things that you can do, not just looking at layers, but you can measure things. You can see how many dams there are in their watershed. You can do a lot of significant analysis, even as a complete beginner. But if you have already used it, or what happens more is that we have people who are already comfortable with a desktop GIS. So they say, okay, I don't need this web GIS, but I still encourage it because you can teach others. This is a way that your stakeholders can also access those same data layers. You know, they're not going to use ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. And you will also find that there are more data layers available. So this picture just shows a few of them. I'll go through a few others again in my session. But last night I spent a couple hours actually looking at layers. There's new ones since I last went through it, and there's just continually more layers. And so it makes such an easy way to get all this information. If you go to it today, you will actually get this red box at the top left. I just got it, so I thought, well, I'll copy it this way. So this means they do have a new version available. This current one has been available for quite a few years and it works great. So I don't see a reason to switch. I did then because, okay, I can be a beta tester. I went in and, it's very fast too, but the current version is fast. So I don't know what the advantage is of this beta version, except that I see IU branding all over the place. So, but there's probably some others, and maybe in some years we'll need to switch to the new one. But from what I could see, there isn't a good reason to switch to that now. So just X that out. You just turn that off with an X and just use the existing version. All my videos are with the existing version. So that's what I wanted to check. Do I need to make new videos? But I think that the new version will be just fine. Okay, the other tool that we suggest to everyone is a very specific data layer, right? Indiana Map has, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of data layers. Web Soil Survey only has one, and it's the soil, but there's a massive amount of information in the soil layer. So here I think the issue is probably not whether you've used this particular tool or not, but whether you see a usefulness for soils. And some of you may have the impression that soil information is mainly for agriculture, for crop kind of information, and indeed that is why it was originally developed around, started probably 100 years ago, and we've had these books, but now it's all online. But I think it's because soil affects water. In fact, it's useful for anybody who works on watersheds. So if you haven't used Web Soil Survey or the similar tool, again, you can derive meaningful information about soils for your own watershed, and we'll show you how to do that through the videos. There's this one video on Web Soil Survey, and Bob Clark will walk through a little bit. If you have already used Web Soil Survey, and I know you who are in the USDA world use it all the time, so you do not need to do it for this. But I would still think you could also teach others. And there may be information that you're not used to using. You may have a set part of information that you get. But the other thing is you can also use Soil Web app instead. And I'm afraid I didn't put it in the handout, but it is in the R3 module. This is a group of people at University of California, interestingly, who made an even more friendly tool. This works really well on mobile devices. So you can go out to the field and pull up all your soil information. So that's an alternative that you might use to also get at soil information. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify again that at 9:45 we'll have the two options. And so if you do think about it in the next few minutes about renaming yourself by adding a 1 or a 2. And if somebody has trouble renaming, please put it in the chat. But if you'll do this, I don't think we should, Sarah shouldn't have to make the decision. So you should be able to choose. So again, option 1 with Bob Clark, option 2 with me. And I thought, so he's going to go through Indiana Map and Web Soil Survey. And I'm not sure if he's going through Google Maps. It says that on the agenda, but I'm not sure if he actually will. Bob, if you're on, if you want to jump in and say that. Maybe he's not on yet. But what I'll be doing is going through other web tools useful for watersheds. So in just a minute, we're going to look at a tool called Model My Watershed. I hope Scott is on. And then we're going to look at EPA's How's My Waterway, briefly, the Indiana Floodplain Information Portal, and an alternative called Flood Factor, which I think makes it really easy to look at flooding. Flooding's been on my mind lately because we keep getting calls about it. It's certainly increasing. So I've sort of been thinking how watershed leaders, what you need to know about flooding. And then a lot more data layers in Indiana Map. So however much more time we have, we'll talk about other things that you can do with Indiana Map. So put yourself as 1 or 2. And so now here's my introduction. And so Okay, I see that Scott is now on. So Scott, if you can rename yourself, that would probably be great. But I've been looking around at tools, right? So I am a tool user, a little bit of a developer, but more of a user, and I watch what's out there. And there's been one called Model My Watershed, which has been out for several years. And interesting, part of a larger program called wikiwatershed.org. And so I have known that this is an unusually sort of modern interface. It's not using, the old stuff. It's the way we do things today, which is very user friendly. And so modeling is something you probably all hear about. There's some consultant or something that runs models, but in this case, there is one you can actually run. It's not for everybody, so I don't want to have everybody jump into it, but I think this is one of the more accessible ways that you can actually run a model. And I think that it's a good option if you feel ready to step into modeling of your watershed, doing something a little bit more. But it's easier than most, but I don't think it's easy. I hope that's reasonable, Scott, to say that. So because this is new, I'd really like to hear about your experiences with this if you choose to do this as part of R3. But without further ado, I'm really grateful. I contacted them and Scott Ensign stepped forward. We had a nice Zoom conversation the other day. So that's how much I know. And he's going to give a very brief introduction to it. I only gave him 10 minutes and then we'll have some time for questions. But then he'll join group 2 for a little bit more if you want to hear more about it. So I will stop sharing. And Scott, that's all my introduction to you, but thank you for being here and please go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, thanks very much, Jane. You got me there on the screen?
Yes, it looks great.
All right, well, thanks very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to speak to you all this morning and share the Model My Watershed tool with you and give you a little overview. So it makes sense to kind of start with an introduction. I'm the assistant director here at the Stroud Center, but also one of our research scientists. And makes sense to give you a little introduction of the Stroud Center so you know where this tool came from and why it was developed and who's developing it currently. So the Stroud Center is a nonprofit, independent, non-advocacy water science education and watershed restoration program. We've got over 50 full-time and part-time staff, and we do 3 things. The first and longest running thing we do is freshwater research, streams and rivers, wetlands. And we do this in a multidisciplinary and collaborative fashion and have colleagues all around the world. The second thing we do is educate people, youth and adults, K through gray, a variety of different kinds of programs, hitting over 10,000 individuals per year with our programs in-house and out of house. And then we have a watershed restoration team that works mainly in the mid-Atlantic states, working with farmers, landowners, municipalities to put BMPs on the ground to improve water quality. So those are the 3 legs of our stool, our program at the Stroud Center. And I'm going to talk to you today about Wiki Watershed, one of the tools in this digital toolkit that we have that is made for, includes a variety of tools. Model My Watershed is one of them. And it's made for practitioners, researchers, like yourself, educators. So let's jump into that, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the fact that this is a actively developed tool. So we have colleagues and funding sources who are actively developing this tool. And I'm sorry, I need to go in here and stop this auto advance. From advancing all my slides for me. We have, let's see, these timings. There we go. That should do it. And let's switch here. All right. You got me on screen, or do I need to reshare?
Sorry, we have you. You're on this first slide though.
All right. So this is an actively developed tool with collaborators and funding sources. Just wanted to make you aware that there's a lot of folks out there that have contributed to this tool. It's not just the Stroud Center, colleagues at Limnotech in Michigan, Penn State, Utah State, Drexel, Xavier is a consulting firm that we use to do the heavy duty lifting on the computational side of things. This is a tool based on Amazon Web Services. And in order to do that, in order to produce and allow you to use this tool on a national basis, so the tool is applicable anywhere in the lower 48. In order to do that, we had to serve it on a platform like Amazon Web Services. So this is a really sophisticated cutting edge tool. And I'll also make a disclaimer. If you go to use this tool right now, today, you'll notice that it's slow. It's much slower than normal. And that's because we just pushed an update. And we pushed the high resolution USGS stream network to the model. And this we're finding is bogging down the system as the software tiles all of this new information. So there's going to be a spin up period nationally as users use it across all geographies. And it's the way that the scaling of this tool works. And so you'll find that it's a slower than normal if you go particularly to Indiana right now. So just a disclaimer. That's what happens when you develop tools and you add new features. There's always going to be surprises that you couldn't calibrate right off the bat. So bear with us as the tool spins up. So there's really four broad things you can do with this tool. And I'm going to walk you through some just screenshots of some of these. But the first and most basic thing to do is to use it as a GIS. A lot of people use Model My Watershed simply to get a snapshot view of what's in a watershed that you might be studying, that you might be working in. We use it a lot that way as researchers, just to get an overview of what's out there on the ground. The next thing you can use it for is to explore what monitoring data is being collected in a watershed. And you can search various databases to see what federal and non-federal resources are out there on the ground collecting water quality data. The third thing you can do is use models to simulate the flux of water, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment off of a watershed that you select. The most powerful thing you can do is to then iterate and change the land use in a scenario building approach to install best management practices or to change conservation efforts on the landscape and see how that affects water, phosphorus, nitrogen, sediment loads from your watershed. So the workflow kind of looks like this. So I'm going to show you in just a sec and tee up some screenshots. So you're going to select a watershed anywhere in the continental US. You're going to analyze land use. And again, that's where a lot of people stop. It's a very helpful, handy GIS tool in that sense. You can go on to explore the monitoring data. We'll look at that real quick. But then we get to the running models and doing scenario building and changing the landscape and then rerunning the model. And that's where the real power of this tool comes in. And finally, you can share the results. So Model My Watershed is an open source tool. There's this active development community, and you can save whatever scenario you build. You can share that, and you can even document it with a digital object identifier for publication purposes. Okay, so let's jump in. So if you go to www.modelmywatershed.org, you'll come to this entry screen. And the first thing to do is to select an area, and you can do this in 4 different ways. You can select a HUC boundary, 8, 10, or 12. You can draw your own area on the map, or you can delineate a watershed. And again, we're using the NHD plus high resolution stream network data. You can click on a point on the map and it'll delineate the watershed upstream from you. And the fourth way is you can upload a shapefile from an ArcGIS shapefile to delineate a watershed. So that typically happens pretty quickly, and you'll get this. The next screen here is a summary of what's in that watershed. So it's going to tell you about the stream network, and I'm going to use my mouse here. Can you see my mouse here in the upper right? Yep. So
yes,
got these tabs here. So we're on the Analyze tab. So again, we're analyzing what's in the watershed, and there are a row of different features here, which it's going to summarize. And within each of those, you'll get detailed information on a bar chart and a tabular display. So what kind of soils are in your watershed? What's the aspect and terrain and relief? What's the climate? What are the point sources, the NPDES point sources? How many animals, according to USDA and county level counts? What types of poultry, swine, cattle are in a watershed? And what kind of water quality monitoring is being done there. So again, we're just getting an overview snapshot of what's in the watershed, right, at this point. So let's move over to this monitor tab. So if you clicked on the monitor tab, again, I'm up here in the upper left, you can search by keyword. In this case, I use discharge, the term discharge in the search bar, and it's going to search 4 different databases. The HydroShare is a repository of user provided data that's organized by the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Sciences. So HydroShare is one resource that it's going to search, and you can see here it returned 15 results. The Water Data Center is another resource that's going to search. Synergy is another EPA, I believe, organized repository of spatial data, and the Water Quality Portal. So it's going to search all those repositories and give you this scrolling list of sites. You can click on the map, and in this case, drill down for more details here, and it'll give you a website to go to find data for a particular source. So that's the ability of the tool to look at different data sources for water quality data. Now let's move into the modeling part of things. So there's a lot going on here, and there's 2 types of models that the user can select between: the site storm model and a watershed multi-year model. So generally speaking, if you're interested in looking at the effects of a single storm event, and you want to look at the flux of nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, and water from that watershed on a storm event basis, you'd want to use the site storm model. The site storm model is actually an amalgam of a number of different submodels that are all coordinated together within Model My Watershed to produce output of these 4 different factors on a 24-hour basis. So we're using the USDA TR55 runoff model combined with EPA Step L model. Some of you might be familiar with these tools, but it's all operating in the background, and at the end of the day, it's going to give you an output of a 24 hours worth of output. The watershed multi-year model is different. It's based on a single model called the Generalized Watershed Loading Function, the enhanced version. This is known, it's been implemented as the MapShed model, for maybe that rings a bell for some folks. But the idea here is that we're going to get an output of annual average flux, again, of water, nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment on a monthly basis that summarizes a 30-year record of hydrologic observations, hydrology and temperature. So you're going to have different uses for these tools, and you can begin to see how you might think about using them in your particular watershed. So what's going on behind the scenes is that both of those models are pulling input data for your watershed from a wide variety of different federal sources that are available, again, across the lower 48. So precipitation and temperature, groundwater conditions, soil conditions, obviously the stream network, the relief of the watershed, point sources from the NPDES discharge records and permitted discharges, animals, land cover, and soils. So the models are both ingesting this data and then providing you some output. And that is, again, some people get there, but the real power and the real point of building this tool and continuing to develop it is the application it has for managers, for practitioners, for scientists and the ability to go in and tweak the model and change the land cover to play scenarios. Suppose we develop a parcel of land in a particular way. Suppose we introduce cover cropping and soil health practices in a particular portion of a watershed. Suppose we put in green infrastructure in an urban setting. The model is made to allow you to do that in an iterative, graphical, easy way, and then rerun and analyze the difference between where you started and how those changes affect water, nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment loads. So I'm going to wrap up by describing two different efforts, two different applications of the model that I think have within Pennsylvania on a countywide basis and across Pennsylvania, give you an idea of the scale and some of the applications. So there was a report back in 2019 that the Stroud Center was involved with a portion of, this was an effort led by our county planning organization. And the question was on a countywide basis, what's the value of our open space? In Chester County, we happen to have 30% of our county is preserved open space, which is fantastic. The question was, what is that doing for us in an economic way? And so the bottom line is that we used the watershed multi-year model and the site store model, which I just described, to calculate what would happen if that current condition was changed to allow development in a fashion across that preserved land that we currently have that would mimic what's happening in the rest of the county. And the conclusion was that we saved $263 million upfront in capital costs for stormwater control, and we save $134 million per year in O&M costs. So that's the bottom line, but let me tell you a little bit more about how this was done in the model.
Okay, and we just have if you can just wrap up soon, thank you.
Yep, great. So again, we use the site store model in combination with the watershed multi-year model, and the results are a % decrease or increase rather in the volume of stormwater and nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment that would have to have been treated if our preserved open space wasn't present. And lastly, in Pennsylvania, we can use the Model My Watershed as a pollution reduction plan compliance and TMDL planning effort that's accepted by PADEP. So, all right, so thanks.
Thank you, Scott. And it was really great to put things in dollars at the end. This is what we're always struggling to do, right? Because we know our stakeholders listen to that dollar language. So thank you for that. So we don't have time for questions now. If any of you do have questions, please join group 2, right? And we'll have Scott with us there. And so, but otherwise we're going to split. I hope everybody is ready. Sarah, are you ready for us to split up into the groups?
Yes. So as a reminder, those of you that are in group 1, don't click the join button. You'll stay in this main room.
Okay.
And for room 2, click your join button. I'm sending you for 30 minutes. So go ahead and do that. And then it looks like, Chris, I need to assign you to room 2. So you should be going.
Okay. So those of us in 1, we just stay.
And Jane, I did not assign you to 2, so you'll have to join that one on your own.
I thought I was in 1. Oh, I know I'm in 2. Sorry, I am in 2. Okay, you're right.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
And Bob Clark clicked his join button, so I apologize for all the people in group 1 until he realizes he's there by himself and comes back. We'll be pausing. I don't know how to get to him to bring him back. He'll soon realize he's alone. Or maybe not. Maybe he won't realize he's alone and you all just get to hear me ad lib on tools that I have not prepared to share with you. Apologies. I love that you're laughing at me. Thanks, Donnie.
It's all good. Seems to be the weather today.
It's like
reflecting our
the
mood.
Mondayest Wednesday ever. That's what I said yesterday about Tuesday too. It's the Mondayest Tuesday ever. Bob Clark is
You're
by
doing great,
himself.
Sarah.
I'm sorry, what?
You're doing great.
I like it. I'll just talk to me. Mandy is now there too, so maybe she's gone to rescue Bob. Or not. All right, who wants to volunteer to join room 1 and go rescue Bob and Mandy?
I have texted Mandy and told her to tell Bob to come back to the room.
That must be Hannah, right?
Yes.
Awesome. I love that you guys share a brain. We'll just hang out. It'll be fine. Hey,
can go.
Bob, thanks for joining us.
There we go.
Okay, I was in the wrong somehow. I went to the wrong place. I never even left my chair though.
You clicked the button when it told you to click the button, and that was what screwed you up. Did
Well,
Mandy
I'm-
come back too? Mandy's back too, so we're good to go. I'm turning it over to you, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Okay, everybody. So this is the I guess the basic track. And before we get started, I'd like to kind of set just a couple expectations, and then also take a moment to take a poll to kind of gauge some familiarity with some web tools on people in this session before we start diving in. So first of all, in this session, what you guys are going to get a quick overview of are 3 common tools that you can use to see things on a map, basically. They're GIS tools, so geographic information systems are just ways of organizing data geographically. So there's all sorts of software that does this, really expensive applications, lots of industry specific types of applications. And you guys are probably used to using one of them all the time, which is either Apple Maps or Google Maps, a way that you can see where you are and where you want to go. So that's what we'll be talking about. The 3 tools that we'll discuss will be a thing called Indiana Map, which is basically a database of information overlaid on a map for the state. And we'll go through briefly how that website's laid out and what types of information you can access in it. And then we will pull up a couple examples and you guys can ask some questions. We'll talk about the Web Soil Survey, which is a NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's an NRCS tool that you can use across the country. And it's a compilation of all of the soils data that the NRCS has put together. So all of the soil maps and the suitability for different types of uses, the characteristics of the soils, you can access all those things through the Web Soil Survey, and that's free as well. And then the last thing is Google Maps, and how you can use a tool like Google Maps to organize and store some of the information that you might be collecting about your watershed. So if you found an illegal dump site, or you just took a photo of something, you can put that not just in a folder on your computer or attach it to an email that you send someone. You can actually store that somewhere on a map and then give other people who you might be working with access to view that same map. So it's really useful for something like a watershed inventory. It's also useful to share, communicate information about your watershed or about any place with a lot of people, because you can see it all on a map, and that's all information that you create. So with that kind of brief overview, I guess kind of onto the poll now. Can I get a rough gauge of kind of maybe everybody could just raise their hand. How many of you have used at least one of those 3 things in the past? You might have to turn your video on so I can see the hands. Okay, there might be a couple Apple Maps users out there who've never used Google Maps. Okay, how many? I'll call that half, maybe more than half. How many of you have used 2 of these 3 tools before? Okay, Miranda, Stephanie, nice. Anybody else? How about 3? How many of you have seen or used all 3 of these things? Okay. Oh, Stephanie. Okay. You might be in the wrong group, Stephanie. Okay.
It's been a long
With that-
time since I used the soil survey. I need a refresher.
Okay, well, that's what we'll do. We don't have much time, but we'll give everybody a quick crash course. And the point of this is that, you know, for R3, you know, you guys will be able to hop onto these websites and have enough familiarity to be able to navigate them and to complete the assignment pretty easily. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and get started. Okay, so I'm going to start with Indiana map. Make this go away. Okay. Is everybody seeing my screen all right? I'll take silence as a yes. I can't see anybody's faces anymore. So Indiana map, you all have links to these websites. When you land on Indiana map, you see this first page, a lot of information on it. What you want to do is you want to go view the map. So down here in the bottom left, you can click on view the map and you'll be taken to a map of Indiana. Now, I've already preloaded some layers. I'm going to remove all the layers that I have loaded. And this is what you'll see when you open Indiana map. And what you can do on this map, like most GIS applications, is you can choose to view a lot of data. So the default map, the default base map shows roadways and rivers. It sort of looks like the kind of map that you would expect if you bought a map at a gas station or if you open Google Maps, right? Where am I and what city am I near, that sort of thing. The real power here is that you can go to the layer gallery. So if you guys can see my mouse, up here in the upper right, I can add a bunch of layers on top of the base map. So the base map's what I'm seeing now. And you go to layer gallery to explore the different types of information that you can overlay on your base map. So you can see they've done a nice job of sort of breaking this down by category. I'm just going to, we won't go through all these. I'm just going to pick a couple examples just so that you guys can see how to load a layer and how to switch back and forth between layers. One layer that you might be interested in, if you're looking at your watershed, would be maybe an environmental layer. And so one of the things that we can look at is, say, land cover. So if I click on that, it gives me a lot of different types of land cover maps. And so I can look, I can see what year these maps were generated. And I can also read about what's in them. So I'm just going to pick this 2011 land cover layer, and I'm going to click add layer. Okay, and now you can see up here in my layers tab, I now have one layer added. If I go back to my map viewer, you'll see it looks different now. I'm going to just zoom in to a place here on the map. You can see all these nice little colors. So I'm going to click on this environmental layer and it gives me a description of it. I can change the color of it, and then let's see here, I clicked the wrong button. Can't get to the top of my screen. If I click over here on my map, I can see my layers. I can add layers through here as well. And then I can also pull up a legend. So again, I have one layer on top of my map. I can adjust its transparency. And I can go to the legend and I can see what land cover is being described by that map. So there's a big yellow area here. I can see that that is pasture. There's a lot of light. There's a lot of brown. Okay, outside of town. I think we're outside of Muncie or Yorktown here. That's a lot of cultivated crop ground. You can see some green, some mixed forest. So I can use this very quickly, as opposed to just trying to look at a satellite image. I can actually use this to very quickly break down what type of land cover is in my watershed. That's really important because different ways of using the land have different impacts on the water quality, right? A lot of urban space creates a lot of quick runoff, a lot of ag space creates a lot of nutrient runoff, etc. Okay, I'm going to add one more layer. I'm going to do it this time from the Add Layer tab instead. Come over here. And now I'm going to look at, let's see here, I'm going to pick some imagery. I have all these different types of imagery here. I'm going to go to the USGS topo layer. Gives me a little bit of information there. If I click the link, I'm going to check that box. And now I have those familiar USGS topography maps. And you can see I have contour lines. I can zoom out and you can use these types of maps very quickly visually to understand the boundaries of a watershed based on whatever point you're looking at. You want to see what drains into a particular area. You can use the topography maps very quickly to assess that. And there's a lot of different ways you can view the topography, but with a short kind of crash course like this, I just wanted to have that show you guys a couple different ways to kind of pull a layer up and view it. I'm just going to hop back to the layer gallery here for one more second. You can see there's a lot of layers. So as you're going through R3, or if you're doing any watershed planning, you can come here and you can get all sorts of information about your watershed in Indiana. And you can print maps, which might be useful in meetings or documents that you're putting together. I'll ask you guys to, if you have any questions, to unmute. Does anybody have a question on this before we move on to web soil survey? Okay, so the second tool we're going to kind of take a crash course with is web soil survey. Now, everybody has links to these sites in the course documents. So you have a link that takes you to web soil survey. If you go to Google and you just type web soil survey, or you type Indiana map, you can find these tools through that as well. When you get to web soil survey, you're going to see a lot of information again, but you're also going to see a giant green button. So all you really got to do is click that big green button, and that will take you to the Soil Explorer. So this is where you can go and you can explore the map. Again, you'll notice this is a GIS tool like Indiana Map. So you see a map, you see that it has already an image on it. So this base map is different than the Indiana map base map. The base map is just whatever map is sort of in the background. And I'm going to go through a few features that you can use here and a couple places that you might want to navigate information. So I'm going to start by zooming into the map, which I can select my tools up here. So I'm going to select my magnifying glass tool, and I'm going to zoom into central Indiana. I'm going to pick a little bitty place here out in the middle of nowhere. This is Hancock County. I'm right along Sugar Creek. So I'm here in the Sugar Creek watershed. And you can define an area of interest on this map. And this is where the real power of the web soil survey comes in, is that once you define a boundary on this map, you can pull up all sorts of data and information specific to that area of interest. So I'm going to make a small area of interest, but you can make it any size and shape you want. I'm just going to pick up here, you see AOI. That's area of interest. You can use a rectangle or a polygon. I'm going to pick the polygon tool. And I'm just going to draw a polygon on this map. You can see I just click my way around here. And let's say I double click on my last point, and this creates an area of interest. You can see now I have this cross kind of hatched region on my map. And now this is where I really get to explore the information in the web soil survey. So up here, I have different tabs. You can see where it defaults you to is that first tab. I've drawn my area, and I can pull up some other information. So let's go web soil survey. Let's look at the soil map. So if I click the soil map tab, I can now see these orange lines on my map. And over here, I have the map legend. So I see BR here is for the Brookston silty clay loam soil. See my other soils as well. And I can see what percent of my area is that type of soil. And you guys might be thinking, okay, Bob, why is that important? Well, different soils drain differently. And so I guess in the simplest case, if you have a soil that is very high in clay content, means the particles of soil are almost at a molecular level. They're extremely small. That's clay. They're very tiny. Water binds to those particles molecularly. There's not a lot of water movement through a heavy clay soil. So if you look at areas that are heavy in clay, you have more runoff when it rains. To contrast that, so the opposite end of the soil spectrum would be a very sandy soil, a coarse sandy soil. Those soils, the particles are very large, and water moves through those soils very freely, as opposed to water binding and clinging to the soils at the molecular level. Water is predominantly moving through the soil because of gravity. There's a lot of open space between the soil particles, and water moves through the soil very quickly. So if you have septic systems, if you have contaminated runoff, if you have a landfill or a hazardous waste site or a factory of some kind, and there could be a potential discharge from whatever source, knowing what the soil is like is going to tell you what that contaminated water is doing. Is it entering the groundwater quickly in a sandy soil? It's soaking down into the ground, or is it running across the surface during a large rain event like it would in a clay soil because it can't penetrate the soil quickly. Not a lot of seepage into the soil during big rain events. The other reason why the type of soil is important is because a clay soil is very stable. All the little clay particles tend to stick to each other. Sandy soil is very loose. It's very erodible, is what a soil scientist would say. And so if you have soils that have a lot of sand in them. They're very silty, they're very sandy. During larger rain events, you'll have a lot more erosion, and erosion is a water quality issue as well. So when you're looking at maps, you can look at the land use, you can look at the soil types, and you can put all that information together to make assessments about what types of risks or what types of mitigations, the practices to manage those risks could be considered for your watershed. So you got sandy soils, you have a lot of elevation change, you have a lot of agriculture and cattle. You know, you're going to be thinking about getting cover on the ground, having waterways in place, etc. You have clay soils where there's not as much infiltration, and you're going to be and you've got some contaminated water. You're going to be thinking about quick release to the surface waters, to the creek or to the river. So that's the soil map. I can pull this up. I can take a quick click on my Brookston soil here, and I can see a lot of the properties that I'm talking about. What is the standard kind of slope, which is an indicator of how much runoff there is when it rains. So any of you guys, if you've ever been familiar with designing a grassed waterway or designing any sort of conservation practice in a watershed to manage water flow across the surface, this type of information is important. You want to know the texture, that composition of the soil, and you want to know the general slopes, and you want to put that together with the watershed size, which gives you a volume of water that's moving across the surface and a speed at a certain rain event. So I've got other tabs here. I'm going to go to my Soil Data Explorer. You can see here a lot of features here. You've got soil health, so you can look at organic matter in the soil. You can look at all sorts of different indices, whether the soil is susceptible to compaction or not. You can look at, let's see here, I'm going to go to land use. You have a water management tab. So if you're interested in putting wetlands, ponds, different types of practices in your watershed, is the soil suitable for those types of practices? So you can come over here, you can see any kind of thing you want. Even if you're just worried about building a house or digging a basement, you can come in here and you can look at the suitability of the site for that particular type of use or change. So the Web Soil Survey is a vast is a tool with a ton of information about the soil and its impact on the watershed and its ability to limit or to allow the land to be used in a certain way. Last thing here, there's obviously a lot of features. We can't go into all of them. The last thing here is that once you create a map and you have some data that you want to see, so I'm just going to create something real quick with just a little more data here. I'm going to go to, let's see here, physical properties, and I'm going to, let's say, hey, percent clay. How about that? It gives me a little set of configurations. I could pick, let's say I'm going to go from down to 10 feet. This gives me my breakdown of my percent of clay in the soil within that depth range that I prescribed. It fits all this data out, not only in a map, but in a tabulated form here. And then I can take that information, I go to a printable version of this, and I can create a custom report. So I'm just going to call this sample report for the area of interest. And I can create a PDF. So let's view that. See here, I get these nice professional looking maps. So as you're putting together information, again, maybe you're doing an inventory and you're trying to assess the watershed, this is a great source to take your area of interest, delineate it on a map, pick the types of characteristics that might be of interest for your planning, and produce high quality professional maps for free that you could then include as references or appendices to your water management plan or to your assessment. And it's all very user friendly, very easy to use. We only have a couple more minutes remaining, so I'm going to hop over to Google Maps. Now, the great thing about Google Maps, everybody, you just go to maps.google.com. In Google Maps, you have the ability to create basically pins or locations. So I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to mess that up. 1 second. I'm going to go to my places. I can create lists. So let's say I wanted to have a watershed group map. So we've got our watershed group and we're going to create a bunch of lists on the map. I create that list. I can now add places. So I can put a description in and I can create, let's see here. This is private. I can change. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to show you how to do all of this, but basically if you took pictures during your watershed inventory, you could have that picture on your computer. You could create a location on the map and then you can put it in a list or in a folder, and then you can share that with people. You can do the same thing. You can create a map over here. And now in my map, I can add items. I can share that map with different people. And I can even bring in layers. So Google Maps is a free way for you to store and organize your geospatial data, where the other tools that we talked about were just references where you can mine, you can pull out and you can find data that might be useful in your planning and in your assessment. Okay, I think I'm just going to double check the agenda so we don't run out of time. Okay, yeah, we're going to be pulled into breakout groups here any second. So does anybody have any last minute questions? I know we didn't quite get through Google Maps, but again, you just go to the Maps tab and then you can very easily add data there, attach pictures. Anyone have a question?
You
Okay,
did such a great job, Bob, that everyone is mute.
all knowledge has been transferred
I like it.
with 100% efficiency.
I'm sure as I'm going through this, I'll find a bunch of questions and definitely have to email them to you, Bob.
Yeah, the Google Maps thing, I don't think, Sarah, you'll have to actually use that in your R3.
No,
But
you don't use that until R4.
Okay.
Hopefully the snow that we're getting today will all be off the ground, so you can go out and do your watershed inventory and then use Google Maps then. So, but the other two, Jane has videos that go through a lot of what Bob covered. So hopefully now that you've seen it once with Bob, you'll see Jane's videos and it'll make it a little bit easier. I would emphasize that the goal isn't to understand these tools and be like super proficient. For R3. So spend, a half an hour playing around. If you don't get all the way through the assignment, turn in what you complete. Do not torture yourself by spending too much time digging into the pieces and parts. And if you have questions, contact Bob, contact me. We're happy to help.
we're here for you.
That sounded really sappy. I like it, Bob.
Okay, we waited till the end, so everybody's back now, and thank you. So in my group, we were having a good discussion about the problem with the underlying data, that these tools are very cool now, but the data is still not all we would like. So that's something to be aware of, and I have a video that I'm going to put a link. I want to make the rest of you at least aware of it, that I looked through all the data layers in Indiana Map and sort of comment on ones, pulled out the ones that I think are most important. But as I look through them again, and you'll all see this, there are many data layers that are out of date. So you just have to ignore them. What it means is the folks at the Indiana Geological and Water Survey have not taken the time to take out the old ones. They add new ones, and probably they should take out some old ones. So my first thought was, I'm going to make a list and send it to them, which I could do. But then I thought, well, just make sure that you guys know that just because it's there doesn't mean it's a good layer. And then we talked a little about other places to get the data layers. So we'll share those as well, because there's never enough good data. There's other things that are out there. Hopefully you who are in the Indiana Map and Web Soil Survey now learned a lot and feel ready to go to the next step. So what we're going to do, and it's just 11 minutes till the break, so this will be shorter, is we're going to go to our teams. Thank you, team leaders, for being here. And we really have two questions. I'm going to make sure I share the right screen now. I shared the wrong screen, everybody's nightmare in the last one. Okay, so in the Google Slides, you have another set of slides starting with number 8, and it's web tools discussion. Again, you don't need to write down because we're not even going to come back as large groups. You're just going to take your break from the small groups. But there are two questions. One is, how can one or more of these tools help your watershed efforts? And then what pitfalls do you see? And I'm sure you can come up with some of those. So I hope you'll enjoy 10 minutes of discussing those with each other and share your thoughts. Thanks, Sarah. You can send us off to the groups if that's okay.
And Jane, you'll need to join group B.
Okay.